We are standing in Corinne Swan's extraordinary installation that brings together all sorts of props, from bottles to costumes that were made in collaboration with Max Mara. This installation, Silent Sticks, is based on the Commedia dell'arte. This is a type of improvised arts that was popular in 16th century Italy and is also derived from a text by Flaminio Scala, which has been readapted and reused in so many different ways. And the Commedia dell'arte was really interesting because what it did is it set up all these different ways of trickery. People would play different roles, men would play women, and all sorts of people would disguise themselves in moments of fraud, which gets me to really think about the way that people perform themselves today and how much Commedia dell'arte actually relates to our current global situation, in the ways that people take on roles they might not know of, or they might trick us into believing something that they're not. This installation is incredibly visually compelling because as we enter it, it's almost like entering a stage set. But as the title reminds us, it's called Silent Sticks, so there are no characters or actors. Perhaps the artist is actually leaving it up to us to improvise ourselves. While we can't take these props, we can walk around them and we can imagine what lives they had or who might have used them. And I think what's really interesting as well is that idea of voice. Who gets to play those roles and who gets to also trick people into those roles? This is Margaret Salmon's Ninna Nanna. Margaret Salmon was the first recipient of the Max Mara Art Prize for Women in 2005. She's a New York-born artist who lives and works in Scotland today. And this really interesting film installation brings together three intimate black and white films, which almost feel like studies, made on her handheld 16mm Bolex camera, so she doesn't need to use a film crew, and shows a really intimate portrait of the mother and child. Now, its setup is really interesting because it's in threes, and all around Italy, we're constantly seeing altarpieces and of course the tripartite structure, whether that be the Father, Son and the Holy Spirit, or the mother and child at the center of so many altarpieces. Now, oftentimes when we might go to these museums, which include the mother and child, we might see an idealized Madonna, a sort of passive, maybe perfect idealization of a mother, which is very far from the actual reality of what it takes to be a mother today. Salmon's marrying the historic and the contemporary and showing that these subjects have existed forever. It's just the fact that here we see it from a different perspective. We see it from the mother's perspective, a real perspective. I love the fact that she's brought a film practice, a very contemporary film practice that also doesn't need a film crew around, so she can have a very intimate experience with these women and explore the lives of women today and their relationship to motherhood and what it takes to be a mother as well. We are standing in Emma Tolbert's incredible installation called The Age. The inception for this work actually began in Rome when Emma was on her residency here in Italy. She'd seen a painting called The Three Ages of Women by Gustav Klimt from 1905, which pictures an elderly woman who is supposedly holding her head in apparent shame. She's usurped the idea of shame, and what she's done to the elderly woman is she's given her power, wisdom, authority, which gets me to think about all sorts of different power structures and dynamics, such as the role of elderly women in the world. In this installation that is made up of text, painting, and sculpture as well, we are met with this rather strange, alien, but also ancient/futuristic female figure who is almost faceless with grey hair. She's evidently elderly, and she's walking in this almost dystopian world, which is full of questions on what the state of this imagined world is, but also can speak to the state of our world today. There are some such interesting figures and shapes and words that populate this all-engulfing installation. One of my favorites is in a circular form that lies on the back of one of the women, which says, "Where known life began." And it almost relates to this idea of where does life begin? So oftentimes in these creation myths in history, we are told that beginnings exist up here somewhere, and no one dares to look inside the female body. And what Emma's done is she's almost created a womb-like structure for us, where we can understand where life began. And this idea that life from a woman is constantly denied. And also women's voices are shut off, whether they are a mother or whether they are an elderly woman as well. And so what she does, she charges this space with power. First of all, it's incredibly beautiful. You can't help but just be dazzled by the sheer beauty of the figures and the colors around us. But she also gets us to question exactly what's happening in our planet right now. It's as though she creates a parallel universe from our world with words such as, how much can you tolerate cultures of destruction, aggression, and greed? And when we're in a basement space like this, it really gets us to question who's in power, what structures are in place, and where the role of women lies. In this part of the exhibition, we enter into almost an underworld-like place with Dominique White's sculpture, Deadweight. The word deadweight denotes the weight of everything that is on a ship. What's really interesting is when we're in this underworld-like structure, we're thinking about the roles of the ship. First of all, the sea is a place of great unknown, but it's also a very loaded and political place. We think of the transatlantic slave trade, and that's exactly what Dominique White is doing. She's envisioning all those voices who were unheard and untold and showing them to us in a sculpture that almost upends the nature of sculpture itself. We are standing in Italy. When we think of Italian sculpture, our mind might go to these extraordinary marble carved sculptures by the likes of Michelangelo or Bernini. But what she does with Deadweight is she almost rips that apart. It's almost like she upends the idea of sculpture itself. Listening to White talk about her experience in Italy is really extraordinary. She met with maritime historians where they looked at maps of the seas, but also the history of the great oceans. She also worked with sculptors who taught her how to work in this extraordinary form. And I think that's what this residency is about. It's about delving into this world of the unknown, looking within this country, looking at its fraught history and showing us something anew that can very much speak to the time in which we're living in as well. White's work is also about creating new structures and new systems. And she's spoken about this interesting idea about if one was to create these structures for blackness, then they would have to upend the entire systems of the world. And in a way, this is exactly what Deadweight does. It twists, it folds, it shows us something in different directions. And perhaps it offers a possibility for change. And I think that's what this exhibition is about. It's about hearing from these voices who have otherwise not been heard in history. When you walk within it as well, it engulfs you, not just the way that you can walk up to it, but with its shadows as well, as though it's casting a shadow over history. We are sitting in Helen Kamak's installation, Che si può fare, which translates to what can be done. A title that takes its name from a pre-operatic lament by the 17th century composer Barbara Strozzi. Now, it wasn't until witnessing Kamak's work that I actually even knew about Strozzi herself. An extraordinary composer from the 17th century who has, like so many women, had her voice and her words and her music taken away from her because of who gets to write those stories. This work marries the historic and the contemporary. While it looks at Strozzi combining all these voices together, it also looks at different women living in Italy today, which, if it wasn't thanks to Kamak's work, wouldn't necessarily be heard. Kamak is interested in language. She's interested in the political, the personal, but also the poetic. So she shows us in this sort of tripartite video form all of these different elements unifying together. And that speaks to the nature of the very song itself, what can be done. When women are singing this work, when women are acting in the world, they're doing it in harmony. And as a result, they all become one voice, unifying together. And when I sit in this installation, for me, it's this work that almost brings the entirety of the exhibition together. Because although it's in its own little enclave in the corner, and these are voices, despite it being half the world's population, that we don't often see. And so this work, I think, is really moving because it brings together the diversity of voices, of stories and experiences. Che si può fare is also a lament, and now a lament is a song about loss and longing. Yes, we can lament these past histories, we can lament these unsung voices. I love this idea. This exhibition might be in the Strozzina part of the Palazzo Strozzi, but it almost feels like a phoenix rising from the ashes. This idea that all these women have clubbed together and they are bringing these voices into the forefront. But what Kamak also shows us is that strength and beauty can be born from something like loss. As we enter through this corridor-like part of the exhibition, we experience Emma Hart's installation, Mamma Mia, which is made up of all these different oversized and upside-down jugs, which take the form and reference the likes of the Italian maiolica, the traditional tile that is found all over Italy. And when we look carefully at what these oversized jugs are actually emitting, they're spotlighting all these different sorts of speech marks, which we're able to walk over. And as we're guided through the corridor, we're also met with these different wave-like forms, as if we're testing the frequency of something. Now, as part of the Max Mara Art Prize for Women, the artist has to, of course, live and work in Italy, And that can also be challenging in terms of language barriers as well. And so I love the fact that in here, Hart is really grappling with that. She's grappling with people conversing in different ways. Perhaps they're speaking one language but answering in another. I love the fact that it is these conversations between all these different head-like forms, but when we look carefully, there are unique facets to every single sculpture. Perhaps there are what looks like fingers on some of them. There are patterns on others, and it shows all the different unique traits that exist between us, but also the wonder that can come together when people converse and the beauty that it can create. Laura Provost's film Swallow from 2013 takes at its base the rhythmic breathing of a mouth. This work is so sensual and so all-encompassing. It originally was constructed into a pavilion, but for space reasons, we're just seeing the film here at Palazzo Strozzi. And when we watch this film, we see the delights. It's almost like a Renaissance painting in movie-like form. We see fountains, we see the body, we see this desirable female object and subject, which is also interesting in the sense that women were so often seen as this desired object. But what happens when actually the tables turn and the woman is the creator here? What portrait does she create? This work I almost see as a kind of love letter to Italy and all the sensual qualities that it has, whether it's from eating, whether it's from being with people, kissing, the sensuality of raspberries, pomegranates, waters, figs, everything, honey. For me, the film Swallow is an exploration from what this country can offer from within. I'm sitting in Andrea Butner's The Poverty of Riches, a really interesting installation that brings together all these different iconographies, which marries the more historic monastic renunciation of wealth with arte povera, a movement and style that really opposed mass media style or the art market. While Andrea Butner was on her residency here, she actually spent time with religious communities. And so behind me, we see these different forms of fabrics that echo the uniforms that workers wear within these communities. But also while she was here, she went to the birthplace of St. Francis of Assisi, who renounced his wealth in search of a spiritual quest. And it's this really interesting idea of why these different periods of history, why they both wanted to delve deeper into this more monastic, more raw way of living. And I love how sparse she's made this as well. She gets us to really look at these icons and these fabrics in ways that can tell stories so much more beyond that at first meets the surface. This is Hannah Ricard's film, No, There Was No Red. And it's very interesting. When Ricard was living in Italy, she visited lots of natural phenomena. So used this as her starting point for this film, which is a discussion between different people individually about their experience, about seeing a mirage in Lake Michigan. Now, this is a natural phenomenon. Some see light, some don't, some see the same thing, and some see something totally different. And it's this idea that we all walk through life with these different perspectives. Yes, we hear some people's stories more than others, but we're constantly at battle with what we think and what we see. And I love this idea that by getting us to really think about what is in front of us, what the air feels like, what it looks like, what colour it is, she's getting us to think about all the many different perspectives in the world today.